Back here on Fantasy Focus, and Dynamic Duo was presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. I'm not sure that we saw a better duo at the wide receiver spot from one team than Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in Week 1. Shout out, I said it yesterday to Dan Graziano, called Chris Godwin in the slot, and it was absolutely fantastic. 8 targets, 8 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. And Mike Evans, doing Mike Evans things, 5 catches for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns. Question for me is, what do you do this week? Field Yates taking on the Detroit Lions. Is this a spot where you're going to have both of them inside the top at least 25, maybe top 20?
Top 20 wide receivers for me in both cases. And what's cool about the Chris Godwin, Mike Evans dynamic is they get the job done in such different ways,
exactly.
Right? Like, who's the better touchdown maker? Clearly Mike Evans. Who's the better bet for 7, 8, 9, 10 catches in a game? It's probably Chris Godwin, and it was great to see Godwin find the end zone in Week 1, a year after he had such a down season with the Buccaneers, having 900-plus receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns last year, and the matchup was ripe. I mean, that was as good of a matchup as you will find the entire season against the Commanders. I don't know that too many teams could lay claim to we were underappreciated during the offseason, because so much of our analysis in covering the NFL, not specific to fantasy, is like, they could be great, they could be great, they could be great, could be a sneaky playoff team. The Bucs might have been the underappreciated team, because in a game in which they needed to handle business, they handled business in a major, major way.
Yeah, I actually didn't think that the running game was all that great in this one, which sort of led them to being able to find these two guys. Rachaad White had negative 0.8 yards before first contact. The only running back that qualified that had a negative yards before first contact in Week 1. But when you've got 2 great pass catchers like this, Stephania, why didn't you just go out and find them?
That's what I was about to say. That's why he's not part of the dynamic duo. I mean, it's Godwin and Evans, but I think the important takeaway for fantasy purposes is both can thrive in this offense. Last year it was unclear about that because we had the down year from Chris Godwin. But when you look at the fact that 6 targets to Mike Evans, 8 targets to Chris Godwin, it's pretty even, Steven, as far as the workload. Different situationally, right? As Field pointed out, Mike Evans is going to be your big play touchdown maker. He's so physical. It's really hard to imagine. Did you see, one of his catches? He just, he is taking it away. He is a big man. Yeah. And Chris Godwin, I just think, is excellent at that route running underneath. And so they provide different things. But if Baker Mayfield knows, it's the trust factor too, I think, and the confidence that Baker Mayfield has one season into working with both of them that I think is the difference maker.
Yeah. How much of this, Field, can I ask you, and it's not to take away from Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, how much of this was the Commanders' defense is just another defense that if you've got wide receivers, you want to start against them?
Yeah, you definitely want to start them against the Commanders. Again, good things from Malik Neighbors in Week 2. But I think this duo is more than just a byproduct this past week of who they faced off against. Baker Mayfield, for fantasy purposes, will probably be up and down. A lot of these quarterbacks that are relative non-factors with their legs fit in that same category, whether it's a Matthew Stafford, an Aaron Rodgers. Heck, even for as great as C.J. Stroud still is, the fantasy ceiling there is still a little bit of a question mark for me, right? Who played better on Sunday, Anthony Richardson or C.J. Stroud?
Anthony Richardson. Well, from an NFL perspective,
yes,
C.J. Stroud.
Right, correct. And the inverse took place in fantasy.
In fantasy,
right?
Anthony Richardson, yes.
There are other players like Jaden Daniels versus C.J. Stroud. Clearly C.J. Stroud, but Stroud, who just doesn't run nearly as much, it's just a different factor here. So Baker was excellent. And I will say this, one last Bucs thought. This is a different duo that we're referencing. You mentioned how Rachaad White's running back numbers, running game numbers, rushing numbers were so pedestrian. Bucky Irving looked pretty good in that regard.
Yeah, he did.
9 for 62 for Bucky Irving on the ground. If you had told me coming into this season that Bucky Irving might chip into one facet of Rachaad White's game, I would have bet on it being the receiving, because he led all FBS running backs in catches last year, did Bucky Irving. He's a very, very good pass catcher. Instead, it was his rushing attack that really helped the Bucs on Sunday. Not a total surprise. Yes, the Oregon offensive line was very good, but he also led all of FBS in yards per attempt on runs between the tackles last season. So a guy who's not a big player at all made a lot of key runs on Sunday. He did so at the college level as well. So Rachaad White's workload was plenty good, but put it this way. We've already seen enough from Bucky Irving, I think, to know that if something did happen to Rachaad White, he might step into a very Rachaad White-like role.
Yeah, this could be another tough running game in week 2 going against the Detroit Lions, who just shut down Kyren Williams. They're a big one, which means this dynamic duo could potentially feast again. All right, that was Dynamic Duos presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV are the perfect pair for watching NFL games on Sunday.